So, Clay, with the release of another Star Trek series, we now get to enjoy the annual tradition, or semi-annual, I guess, at this point, depending on how fast these things are coming out, where the critics on Twitter say the show isn't very good. All the Star Trek accounts, everyone's Twitter handle who has like Trek or Star or some character name in it is going to say that this is the greatest show that's ever happened. And that happened today. Because Lower Decks came out. It's the animated show, and we're going to be talking about it right now. People watching the YouTube video will be a little bit confused. I will make a nice background for this at some point, but not today. Not today. So now we're going to talk about Star Trek Lower Decks, and I guess the thing about the podcast that I never really considered is that if you're going to make a podcast, my advice is that you have to niche. You have to find one thing that you bring to something, because if you just do like sports podcast, like no one's going to tune into that. You have to be like down to a team, down to a single player. Like you have to really like hammer in on what you want to do. And I never thought that our podcast niche, we just kind of stumbled into it, was we would be I think our role is navigating the response to this stuff, which is to my earlier point. Like I think of our niche, not to pat ourselves on the back, but it's like, I guess our niche is just like a critical review of this stuff. Sure, so it's not really a fan-ish review. You have to be fans to watch this kind of stuff for 500 episodes, but it's not really a fan-ish response, and it's not super like a detached from Star Trek response at the same time. But that's the thing that's going through my head, and it's mostly totally unrelated to the actual episode itself. But it's the niche, I guess, is important, and I think that I'm looking forward to you taking the role of the cynical TV critic here, and I'll play the Trek fan who just gushes about this. Unless you want to be the gushing fan, do you want to take? that role?
I was gonna say we might have to switch roles for this, because I'm actually kind of surprised that. Well, first of all, I like that we occupy what's that bullshit thing people refer to. Was it the intellectual dark web?
Yes,
where it's like that. We're like the intellectual dark web of Star Trek talk.
It sounds very self-congratulatory, but I only base that just on like when I see the social response. It's all day of looking at Twitter, and it's the critics are going, "This is not very good," and then every Trek account is going, "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to a television series." And I just feel like I feel like it mirrors. It's like if anything, it's just the state of like the universe at this point. Like politics is this way, other movies are this way. It's like there's no middle to anything anymore.
Well, I'm kind of surprised when you told me that. I was a little bit shocked that it wasn't the other way around.
In terms of the critical response, you mean the critics?
Yeah,
the critics
versus the Star Trek people.
Right.
Yeah, because this very much feels like a show that Star Trek diehards would not like, and but it does also have that feel where it's like I can see critics disingenuously or genuinely praising it because it is taking the franchise in such a different direction, regardless of the quality it may or may not have. And that's not to say that if it was total garbage, I'm thinking the critics would say it was amazing. But like my initial response was, oh, this feels like the show where the Star Trek people wouldn't really care for it, but the critics would be like, oh, this is a new take.
It's the tomatometer's audience score versus the critics score.
Yeah, well, it's the Last Jedi of Star Trek shows. That's what I was expecting.
Before we get too carried away, like we've been drinking all day and just started talking about this, let's
That's what happens when we record these at night. I have a lot more room to get drunk.
Let's take a break. We'll play a clip from the episode, and then we'll come back and we're going to break down the pilot episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, which is called Second Contact.
Hot. Banana. Hot.
Ah, frickin' burn me.
Is there an Ensign Boimler here?
Hot. Hi, here, that's me. Ahoy.
Ensign Tindy reporting for duty. You're my orientation liaison.
Yes, welcome. Brad Boimler, Ensign, Command Division.
Oh my gosh! I've never worked with commanders before. I'm in sciences.
I love science. It's so sciencey. I mean, that blue goes green with your, great with your,
Yo,
oh my God.
What up? Beckett Mariner, also an ensign, Command Division, but not quite as impressed with myself as this little rascal over here. You know, we're not actual commanders, by the way. We're more like commanders in training.
I can't believe we're gonna serve side by side. Scientists and commanders, an elite team.
Yeah, no, we're not really elite. We're more like the cool, scrappy underdogs of the ship. You know, we don't wash our hands. We're doing kick flips all the time.
But with focus and dedication, you could be Chief Medical Officer someday.
All right, everybody. So, Second Contact is the first episode of the first season of Star Trek Lower Decks. It aired on August 6, 2020 on CBS All Access. Written by Mike McMahan, I believe it's pronounced McMahon. Directed by Barry J. Kelly. In-universe date is 57436.2, which is 2380. Is that all there is about this one? That is. There's no arcs yet. In this episode, Ensign Tendi has her first day of work on Starfleet's USS Cerritos.
Sorry. Let's be honest here. This is probably the first episode on their way to Risa, because I'm sure they're going to get to Risa before the end of the season.
Where's the time cops? This is Tendi's first day of work on Starfleet's USS Cerritos, where she meets fellow support crew members Ensigns Mariner, Boimler, and Rutherford. Meanwhile, Boimler is tasked with a secret special assignment, and Rutherford attempts to keep his dating life intact while a sci-fi disaster strikes the ship. It's an animated show. Star Trek's done animated before. But even diehards of Star Trek say the animated series is one of the worst things that's ever happened because it is pretty bad. So Star Trek's not really doing something new here in terms of what the franchise does, but it is doing something different. I don't know if you want to do we want to do like a brief thing about where the Star Trek stands as a franchise? Like I think that what they're trying to do obviously is flood the airwaves with Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just going to say they're throwing everything at the wall that they can
just see what happens.
I was when you were talking about at the opening, I was thinking, and I was like, man, it took them almost let's say 40 years to do 5 series, and we've had 3 brand new ones in the past 2 years.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
in the short
maybe
tracks,
3 years.
The short tracks too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So and then you've got 2 more on deck. Theoretically,
at least.
So you've got just as many series they've done in the entire history of the franchise queued up for the in the span of about 5 years.
Yeah,
as they've done over the past 50 years of the show. So it's they're sending it into warp speed.
Well, what's your
Hello?
concept?
Hello.
I'll put his mic back on when he settles down. Drink some water. I think I guess the concern here, right? If you're Kurtzman or you're CBS or whoever, and you're looking at this thing, I guess your concern is it's a balancing act between whether or not, I guess it's how stringently you have to stick to what Star Trek is, right? Like, or how you define that in a way that doesn't upset people. So what I'm thinking of, and I think we talked about it in previous podcasts, is the 90s Star Trek and the 60s original series and the movies and everything have a very consistent tone. It's very consistent. Like the shows, if you are unfamiliar and you're just flipping channels, you would think that it's all the same show because it all looks the same. The lighting is done exactly the same. Enterprise is even kind of the same into the 2000s. It all looks like Star Trek. They're starting to have to change that because they can't bombard us with 4 shows that all look like Discovery or Picard at that time.
Sure.
And so they're moving into animation and trying to change the tone. But I guess in terms of what you think about a franchise, it doesn't even have to be Star Trek. It could be anything that's sort of near and dear to your heart. Is there a point where you can stretch a franchise where it's no longer the franchise at that point? Or do you think anything can be done with care enough that it would work within itself?
Yeah, well, I think we're in a fairly unique time as far as that stuff goes, because if you want to get on Star Trek for doing too much too fast, I would just look at, I mean, it's clear what they're doing is they're saying, okay, or CBS or whoever owns CBS, Paramount, I don't even know if Paramount is still a company, whoever owns Star Trek is saying, okay, Star Trek is our Star Wars. Excuse me. It's the same thing they said in 1979 when they made the original movie. And they're looking at what these other big companies with these big franchises are doing. And it's not just, oh, we're putting out Star Wars movies. It never has been just that. There's always, for the past 10, 15 years, since the end of the prequels, they've done cartoons for Star Wars. They've done video games. They've done books. They've done comics. There's never not, even though there hadn't been movies since the since the prequels, there were no movies. There's always been Star Wars stuff. Ever since the end of Return of the Jedi, there's always been Star Wars stuff. And with Disney, they're doing the same thing with Marvel. Sure, they're making the big movies, but they're also doing, they've got cartoons Marvel cartoons, they've got video games. DC has the DC movie. The only thing they can't get right is the movies, but they're kind of getting there. But they've got movies. They've got basically an entire television station devoted just to DC Comics live action shows. But on top of that, they've also got Teen Titans Go, and they've got Superhero Girls. And these are all not tonally the same thing. The difference for me is I think the new ground that Star Trek is breaking is all of those different tones. I should say those other franchises don't have a singular tone. That is part of their thing, whereas Star Trek very much traditionally does.
Well, comics by its nature is sort of pushing tones everywhere. Like it's taking a stock character that's existed for 1,000 years and then sort of doing something different with it.
Sure, yeah. And Star Trek has never done that. And so that's what they're doing. And because they're doing it so quickly, like it feels a little bit like they're trying to, I mean, it feels a lot like they're trying to figure it out as they're going.
Yeah.
That's a little bit, if I had to say what my problem with the approach is, it feels like they're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks instead of like really crafting a, for lack of a better term, vision. That sounds really pretentious, but like there's not like a one unified idea of how they're going to treat Star Trek.
Right.
So it just seems like, oh, well, we're going to do this. This didn't really work. But the people really like this one character. What if we give him his own show? Sure, why not? What the hell? Well, how do we get these other people back? I don't know. Dude, does anybody still have Patrick Stewart's phone number? Someone's going to have it. So it's like it feels a little scattershot right now. But I think what they're just doing is it's the birthing process of trying to spread the tendrils a little bit further than Star Trek has ever been before. Because even books and stuff, comics and books and the games. I don't know. Like I haven't played the most recent Star Trek video games, but those things are fucking dry, man. Yeah. The original Star Trek games, the few that there were, they're terrible.
No, there might be something unique about Star Trek where it's not really scalable like that in some ways. And this is like without.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think it depends on whether or not you think that you can't apply different tone, because I think if you think the door is wide open, then I think you probably can scale it. It's just not going to look the same. It's not going to look what one might consider as Star Trek. It might not look like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if there's a specific, the more closed off your idea of what Star Trek can be is, obviously the less it's going to be scalable.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's
that's to say, before we get, sorry, I keep talking over you. That is to say, when I say closed off, I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, because the other thing about all those other properties that I mentioned, you don't have to like all of them. Like, just because you like Arrow doesn't mean that Teen Titans Go is going to be your cup of tea. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I think that's part of the growing process for this is it's not all Star Trek is for everybody, but not every Star Trek is necessarily for everybody. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what the problem with their incredible consistency in the 90s has led to, I think, is that there's one vision of what Star Trek can be. And you got a little bit of upsetness in the fan community with J.J. Abrams's thing, which is kind of he J.J.-sized the franchise, is just like he did for Star Wars. And Discovery and Picard are certainly that way. I think there's a difference between the quality of those things and their sort of the difference of the way that they look that I think is sometimes mashed together and not in an effective way, or like the fact that they did something different is not what makes them bad in a lot of sense if you think that they're bad. But it's something that gives people who were raised on the 90s and 60s sense of what Star Trek is reason to dislike it, I think.
Right.
When it comes out.
You know, it's tough for me to, I do like the JJ movies more or less. But I think it's really tough to take anyone who like really shits on them that seriously, because it brought Star Trek back into the conversation. Say what you will about it, you know?
Yeah.
Star Trek was dead, man. That was a dead franchise, and they managed to revitalize it. It was a short burst, but since those movies started, it has been back in the conversation in some form ever since.
Well, here's the thing about Lower Decks, which I guess we can get into now. So Lower Decks is pushing the envelope somewhat. The animated series was here first, but by being an animated comedy show, right? Mm-hmm. I think what it runs into is that, before we even get into the quality of like what we thought about this episode, something that I think Lower Decks potentially can run into, and that I think is a problem, is that all of the new modern shows, Discovery, The Short Treks, Picard, and this one, particularly this one, are extremely referential to the original material. There's no clean break where anyone can come into this and be like, I'm totally new to Star Trek, I'm going to watch one of these shows. Maybe Discovery, because Discovery is so bizarre in a lot of ways that you can not really relate to anything. But even then, like, watching Discovery was tough for fans because of how it fit into the timeline. So it adds that kind of a thing where I think that Picard and Lower Decks are completely referential to what came before them. But you need that context for any of it to actually make sense. And Lower Decks, I think Lower Decks is, I think if 80% of the joy I got from Lower Decks was the amount of references that they put into the script. And I don't think, like, if Amy, my wife, were watching that would all just be, to her mind, what we complain about Discovery, which is just nonstop gibberish. You know what I mean?
Sure.
If you're familiar with it, I think it works okay. But I'm concerned that Lower Decks is going to be really stuck in this referential mode where it has to make jokes about Star Trek, but at the same time, it's not satirical of Star Trek. It like is a Star Trek show, so it's in this uncomfortable place, I think, currently, or at least according to this one episode.
So my counterpoint to that would be, so I watched it maybe 1.5 times. I didn't have time to watch it a complete full second time. Personally, I liked it more the second time. I actually enjoyed it a decent amount the first run through. But it moves so fast. Yeah. Like there's a lot of talking, and it moves very quickly, and it definitely does. It does have that kind of Rick and Morty feel to it. On second watch, a lot more of the jokes landed for me. But to speak to specifically what you're talking about, my girlfriend, who does not watch Star Trek, does not really care about Star Trek, was watching it with me the second time I watched it, and as I was getting ready to come and do the show, she said, let me know when you're going to watch this. I'll watch this with you every week. So she has no frame of reference for anything they said. Yeah. And she still enjoyed it enough where she would like to watch the show.
Interesting. Yeah, because I just think about conversations towards the end where Rutherford and Tendi are just talking about, like, he's like, well, she didn't want to run a level 2 diagnostic on the shuttle bay door or whatever. It's like, and I was just sitting there going, like, it's kind of funny just because I know what they're talking about. Like, I have that built-in vocabulary as to what they're doing. I don't know if you can make an entire series built on that, really. Like, I think that, and to preface everything, I think for both of us, I think comedy pilots are always going to be way different than whatever the show turns out to be. Like, there's no comedy series that ever had a pilot that you're like, this thing was cooking right from the start. It takes time to learn the jokes.
Except Cheers.
Cheers.
Best
Cheers
comedy pilot I've ever seen. Yes.
So, but yeah, you were going to say something. But just I know that comedy shows are more likely than other shows to really change from their pilot. I think all shows change from their pilot into what they eventually settle into, but the comedy one, it seems extreme in a lot of cases that they don't find their comic voice until a couple episodes into it.
Well, it's funny you should bring up that conversation between the two of them at the end, because I actually thought they handled their technobabble in this show much more like a Star Trek show than the other ones do. Because that scene in particular, sure, they're talking about repolarizing the whatever, but it's they're using it as a point of connection between these two characters who they're clearly angling towards, like, falling in love with each other or whatever.
No, sure.
So they're using it as a character moment instead of just being for the sake of saying techno stuff.
Yes.
And so, like when I see that scene, whatever they're saying just goes right over me. I don't give a shit what they're saying, but I can appreciate it as the way that they're handling those two characters. And it's obvious this is not Hamlet here, obviously, but it's like I actually thought they handled that stuff pretty well. But that being said, I do agree. If it's just going to be, let's see how many thousands of references we can jam into an episode, that's going to get tiring pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it's a good point about the Technobabble, actually, because we talked in the previous shows about how Technobabble is really just environmental dialogue filler for Star Trek. It's like if a character has to stop the ship from exploding, he says a whole bunch of nonsense, but the conflict is he has to stop the ship from exploding. Like, you understand the very simple thing that he has to do. I would agree that this show actually does it the best because I actually think this is the strongest script out of, like, whether or not you think it's funny, it's the strongest standalone script out of any of the new series, I think, because it has a clear beginning, middle, and end that everything makes sense, and it also kicks off a new adventure for people. So it's I don't know if you want to call it serialized, but it certainly ties into where they're going to go after this point.
Yeah, the ironic thing about this show, excuse me, for me anyway, is that though it is the most tonally and stylistically on the surface different show they've ever done, it's actually a pretty standard TNG era Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
Given the way that they've got an A plot and a B plot, and they're both pretty clearly defined. Yeah. And then they both end up, running their courses and tying back together at the end, and they have a 10 forward. I don't know if you excuse me if 10 forward doesn't count on this ship specifically as what they call it, but they have a 10 forward scene. You've got a little bit at the end, which
the bridge operates exactly like TNG. The first officer talks to the captain exactly like Riker talks to Picard and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like overall, it's fast talking jokiness aside, it's a pretty standard Star Trek episode.
I think it looks exceptionally like Star Trek. From the opening sequence where they show the space station, that's always the cliche. It's from Star Trek 3 or something. That big one that they reuse thousands of times. They do the TNG. They put the title in the top left corner of the screen. It's using the TNG credits, obviously, and things like that. But it just on a like a cinematography. I don't know if you call it cinematography when it's animated like this, but just the direction and everything of how stuff looks. It really looks reminiscent of TNG. They're obviously honing in on that. The opening sequence is kind of the same thing. It's a Voyager opening sequence, except the ship is kind of running away from everything, except of going boldly into where they need to go to find their way home. So,
which I did want to. Sorry, I do want to talk about that credit sequence in general, but if you've got something...
No, we can talk about it now if you want to, and then we can get into the episode proper.
Yeah, I thought the credit sequence was interesting. First of all, I think the ship looks a lot better in the show than it has in the promo material.
Yeah.
Because in the promo material, it looked like ass. But
looked like a paraglider. I think I'm using that, right?
Yeah.
Where the parachute is tied to the boat. It kind of looked like that, where the base is the boat and is pulling the parachute behind it.
But in action and the way they're shooting it in the show, I think it looks a lot better and reads a lot better as a starship.
Looks like a Federation starship more than any of the other series have at this point.
Yeah, more than anything we got in Picard, that's for sure. How do you feel about that opening credits thing? Because I get it, like I get that they're setting the tone, but I don't feel like, this is a super nerdy nitpick, I don't feel like what you see the ship doing is honest to the rest of the crew.
Sure.
Because the lower decks guys are the ones who are kind of like the knockaround guys.
Yep.
Everybody else who's higher up and on the bridge staff is extremely serious.
Yes, yeah.
Especially the captain. The captain is extremely serious.
Yep.
The captain of the Cerritos, as shown in this one episode, is not going to show up to a Borg fight and then just like back out of the room.
Right. Yeah.
Or you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it's more representative of the tone of the show than it is the actual ship.
Well, I guess that's something we can actually get into. So I don't know if it's a problem or how much they need to focus on. I would agree that in general, the lower decks characters are sort of the goofball characters that we're going to focus on, are going to drive the tone of the show. I think that the senior officers are more serious, but they're still a stylized version of a serious Star Trek show. So while I don't see them running away, they do have, there's a thing at the end where it's like they're fighting something and the security chief is just saying, I've got my phasers locked on the warp core, please let me fire on them. And then the captain says no, and he says, I
like that a lot. That was good.
So I didn't know if, I don't know if they need to stress this dichotomy more, where you kind of believe that the senior officers are very much a Starfleet thing and they're almost not making jokes a lot of the time, and the lower decks crew are kind of the goofballs. That's what I thought was going to happen, but they seem to be playing it much more as everyone is kind of silly in this. Like everyone's a little bit more silly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I think if only the lower decks guys were heightened, it would be a little weird.
It would be strange. Yeah, it would be weird.
Yeah. But yeah, I do think that there is a different, they're handling them slightly differently, and the captain does seem a little out of place compared to everybody else.
Yeah, she's
because the captain's pretty straightforward, a hard ass captain.
I guess she's a little bit. I guess they're amplifying her character just as being overreactive or something. Like she's intense to a comical degree. I guess would be. So
right.
She's kind of she's taking Picard and kicking it up to 11, and that's what you end up with.
What did you?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna. What did you think of the theme?
It didn't soak in. I wasn't distracted by it. It felt Star Trek-y, but it takes a little while for these things to soak in with me. I didn't like it as much as the Picard theme, but I thought it was more of a Star Trek homage than the Picard theme is. But I don't think it's quite as interesting a piece of music.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it sounded fairly stock. It reminded me of the music from Rogue One, actually, where it's like, yeah, I can see if you went to I would like to apologize to the person who wrote the music for this, and also Michael Giacchino, who wrote the music for Rogue One, when I say this, but it sounds like you went to a stock website and typed in space music,
right,
and then you get this sort of like big horns orchestral thing, and maybe it'll grow on me, I don't know, but it doesn't have the personality as even Discovery has. Like they've I was going to say Enterprise aside, but even Enterprise has a very specific theme song. Right. So you kind of have to count that.
Yeah.
But like it doesn't feel like it's its own thing as much as all the other shows do.
Yeah.
It actually reminded me of Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
That sounded like the music they would play for like the Galaxy Quest TV show.
Yeah, I wonder if it's intentional that it can't be too bombastic to distract you from the visuals, which are the main thing carrying that, and that they don't want it to be. It's hard to say because I've listened to it twice because I watched the episode twice, but it didn't grab me.
It might be part of the joke too that it's intentionally kind of generic Star Trek.
Yeah, right. Just to match the credits and everything like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, back to I thought the script here was strong. Like ignoring the comedy. Comedy is going to be subjective in a way that I think like story structure is slightly more objective. There are ways that you can push it, but I think that like they wrote a script that largely works, I think, at telling you what the show is going to be about and how it's going to actually work. And it's very quick just because we're now used to watching the Star Trek episodes, which are the 45 minutes. And to get it over in like 22 is like, okay, I didn't even have time to really like blink my eyes before this thing was over. But I think that.
But it has like 45 minutes worth of dialogue in it, I think.
It does. Yeah, it's definitely a podcast. Listen to it 2 times speed.
Yeah. It's like I was watching something on YouTube where they were talking about Hamilton, the play, and how it's notable that it has many more words in it than most plays do because of the fast singing and rapping that they do.
Yeah.
And they said if you were to take all of the words spoken in Hamilton and pace them out at the pace of a normal play, the play would be about 6.5 hours long.
Yeah.
So it feels kind of like that, where it's like they're talking real fast. They're getting a lot of stuff in.
Do you like the pacing of this? This is the big. If I were to say that there's a big criticism that I'm seeing of this show, it's that people don't like this kind of fast-paced comedy. I actually watching it, I think I was just sort of prejudiced against it because I was reading that all day, that people were like, this is too fast, I can't understand it. I didn't think it was actually that fast. I thought it was it's definitely this new modern blend and speed of comedy. But I thought it was. I thought I didn't have trouble tracking it, I guess, in some ways. Like, I feel that Discovery's Technobabble actually feels faster to me because I can't, my brain just shuts off because I don't know what it is. But here I thought that they were talking fast, but I was actually tracking what they were talking about, which I thought was kind of an accomplishment. And this just seems to be the new pace of how you do animation comedy at this point. I'm not sure if it's a like improv aspect of it where the actors are just sort of like freeballing a lot of takes and like going with it and just like getting more energy out of it and stuff, and that they can cut them together like this. I don't really know why it comes out that way, but this just seems to be the new mode of doing this stuff.
It seemed from what I've seen, it seems like that's just like they decided at some point that these animated comedies needed to have like much higher energy. And so a lot of the characters, there's always one character in all these shows now who talks really fast and is like overly hyper.
Yeah.
And,
Tilly.
Your mileage will, what's that?
Tilly from Discovery. Yeah.
Your mileage will vary with that kind of character.
I wonder if it's a side effect of like, I think you can kind of compare it antithetical to something like The Simpsons, which is that The Simpsons has a relatively low joke count compared to something like this, right? But its jokes feel like they have a higher batting average than this. So it's like they're higher quality jokes, but they're fewer of them. And it feels like modern trend is to more they're writing this in the room, obviously. So everyone is just sort of shouting out suggestions about what they want to do. And the idea is that people will think this is funnier even if we're hitting a lower average of jokes, we have more jokes in our show. So there's more opportunity for people to laugh at it. And I wonder if that's just kind of a new design in the way that they write these things. It's just if we can't have all of these jokes be AAA material, just put a whole bunch of B minuses in there, and some people are going to like some of them and some aren't.
Yeah, it's possible. It is definitely a different way of doing it. And I always wonder how much production has to do with that, because I don't know how this would be a direct one-to-one, but I think producing these shows is a lot quicker and a lot easier than it used to be.
Yeah.
And so that probably allows you to have a little bit more control over pacing and speed and how these things are going to play out, especially when it comes to animation. Because if you're doing most of the stuff in the computer, you can control that stuff a lot easier than...
Right. It's much easier to change their mouths at this point than it was back in, when it's hand-drawn or whatever, and it's 2 months of work to change a line of dialogue or something like that.
Right, exactly. So yeah, that might have something to do with it.
Did you think it was funny? Did you think the show was funny?
I did, actually. Like I said, the first run through, I think there were only a few jokes that I really enjoyed. I really like the hot banana thing with the broken replicator, because I'm very fascinated by replicators and how they work. So having a replicator on the fritz was enjoyable.
Yeah, it's not just usually in Star Trek it just gives people not what they order. Like they're like, give me a coffee, and it gives them a tea, and they're like, oh, replicator's broken.
The fact that it was actually saying hot banana. I also really liked the sequence when the giant spider starts suckling on the guy. I just thought that was I really enjoyed that. I thought that was funny.
That's a very modern humor where they set the joke up as to a character says something absurd like the spiders probably get milked, and the other character goes like, what? And then when it's happening, the farmer alien runs over and is like, don't shoot her, we'll spoil the milk. It's that kind of that seems like a Family Guy type of modern sensibility. But I like the spider suckling. I like the hot banana. I like I generally like the zombie stuff. Once the guy gets bitten and the phasers and this is going on all over the ship. I like that. I thought that was fairly funny as well.
Yeah, I thought, like I said, the second time through as I was watching it, I think because they were throwing so much at you the first time, maybe not everything, I wasn't totally taking it all in. But watching it again, I found myself laughing sooner.
Yeah.
And at stuff that it just sort of brushed past me the first time.
Yeah. Even minor material like the chief engineer, I think, who's voiced by Paul Scheer, who I think only has one line.
Oh,
but
sure.
he has kind of a funny line about the mission is doing second contact, where it's just doing the paperwork, and he can't pronounce the name of the aliens. He has to like read it off the page, and it's like that's kind of a cute little joke. And I think that there's plenty of material that can be drawn from this fact of this ship, the concept of lower decks. Like I think that for an animated series, the concept of what this is, which is a fairly unimportant ship, that the main cast are fairly unimportant people on the ship. I think there's room there to do stuff with that. I think that there's like a whole aspect of like Starfleet bureaucracy and Federation bureaucracy and like what goes on behind the scenes. I think that in some ways, despite the goofy, like crazy nature of it, you can in some ways, because it's so linked to this bureaucracy and second contact type stuff, you can actually in some ways get more real world content out of it. I feel like you can actually use the comedy in a kind of more satirical sense that I don't think Star Trek itself usually supports, because it's not really designed as a satire.
Yeah, and I think this is the kind of show where you can balance out the over-the-topness of the stuff that they're doing with leaning into the humor of the more mundane stuff that they don't really ever talk about on Star Trek, like the bureaucracy and that. Because like I feel like there's plenty of humor, especially modern, the way they handle this stuff in modern shows. There's plenty of humor baked into the mundane and the boring day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, because I feel like the disconnect on this show is going to be: Are you looking for this to be a satire of Star Trek, or is the fact that it is like half Star Trek satire but half just we're going to do a comedy in the Star Trek universe? Is that going to be a problem? I feel like that's the disconnect for some people, because because like this isn't explicitly like Galaxy Quest, where it's every joke is like, oh man, hot banana, or it's, and every joke isn't based in stuff that you're familiar with in the Star Trek universe. It's just they're telling a comedy series story in the Star Trek universe. Not everything is tied to transporter jokes or making the stuff about the engine room being filled with like booby traps and shit. Like, you know what I mean? I think people who are looking for it to be like a straight satire of Star Trek are going to be disappointed by it.
Yeah,
whether or not that's enough to turn you off completely.
I would agree, and I would think that the people who want this to be a straight satire are actually probably the hardcore fans of it. And
sure.
This show can't survive as a straight satire of Star Trek. I don't think. It's compared to Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is inspired by Back to the Future, the Doc Brown and Marty McFly relationship. Right. But they are not in the Back to the Future universe. You know, so they can do whatever they want in that, but all that the inspiration is doing is informing the relationship between these two characters, where it's the mentor, who in this case is like a foul-mouthed sort of like crazy person, and a young naive guy who is the main character that you're seeing it through. Galaxy Quest is kind of more like that, because Galaxy Quest doesn't have the branding of Star Trek, so it can't be explicitly referencing Star Trek. It can just make homages to it, which I think is actually better for it, because I think if there's too much Star Trek content in this, which was my worry at the start, if it's just referencing things and making jokes about, there's a reference a Star Trek fan would know. Why do Bolians have blue skin? Who knows? There's a joke about it. Okay, there's another thing. I don't know the legs that it'll have that Rick and Morty had, for example. I think they have to branch it a little bit. You have to add some kind of depth that is, the humor can't only come from the fact that this is Star Trek material.
Right. And I think that's where they're going, which is what I like about it. Because I do think that the characters they're setting up do have enough legitimate drive and arc potential built into them that it'll be able to work on its own while also being a Star Trek comedy.
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's a pilot. I think the pilot is setting the tone for what this is supposed to be doing. There's a lot of Star Trek references in this. I think it works outside just, in terms of the infection is just a zombie attack eventually, which is more universal than anything that they could say about Star Trek. It's got the the two main characters who are very foils to each other, very different personalities. Where Boimler is, I think it's Boimler is his name, is the more uptight, sort of like wants to move up into the senior command, and then there's the let loose Mariner who doesn't want anything to do with command, and she has been kicked out of it all the way down. And then you have the other two who are going to sort of fill the blanks there.
You know what the best part of this episode was that actually makes it better than a lot of the new Star Trek that we've seen up to this point? The fact that the two plots tie together because the goop that he gets from the spider ends up solving the problem, which then informs the relationship between the rest of the characters for the last 5 minutes of the episode and sets the stage for everything moving forward.
Yeah.
That kind of tight storytelling we haven't seen on Star Trek in like 15 years. It's good. It's like even outside of it being a comedy, it's just well scripted.
Yeah, it's everything is built upon a structure that's understandable here.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have your solid structure, you can pepper it with jokes as much as you want. But it's just this show's got to be more episodic, I would assume, right? It feels like it's not going to do anything crazy. Maybe they'll have a runner about the captain being the mother of Mariner.
That seems likely, yeah.
But that's about it.
I think that's great because I think that in of itself is a good. That's the other thing. I thought the characters were really interesting.
Yeah.
They're fairly boilerplate idea characters, but the way that they set them up, like I really liked Mariner and how she's the daughter of the captain and the admiral, who's clearly been knocking around on different starships, and now she's stuck here, so she's got this sort of like been there, done that kind of attitude. I like that compared to the uptight guy. I like the new girl, Tendi. Is that her name?
Tendi, yeah. And then Rutherford.
I loved Rutherford. I thought
he's got potential. He's being a cyborg, and I guess they say in this episode it's a Vulcan cyborg implant, so it settles his emotions or whatever. I think there's potential there. It's it's going to be a heightened example of this. This is not a comparison, but we always complained about Burnham. Burnham's characterization as a human raised on Vulcan is never really addressed. The show is not really interested in what that would mean for this character. Here, it's a very heightened effect of what if a human was just sort of implanted with Vulcan technology? What would comedically, how would that play out? It feels like they're more aware of, in this comedy session, of how this is going to work than someone like Burnham would be driven as a dramatic character by it.
Yeah. And, when I hear people compare this to Rick and Morty in a negative way, I don't really get that, because if this is coming from the pedigree of Rick and Morty, you can expect these characters to be good characters that actually have affecting character moments along the way. Because that's the one thing I think a lot of people forget about Rick and Morty is it's actually, on top of all the silliness, it's a really well written show.
Yeah,
and they do a lot of devastating character work on that show. So if they get like even a quarter of that into this, I think it's going to be pretty solid.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can wrap it up there. Did you have anything else? I mean, just my final thoughts about it is just that it's I don't know if I want to say it was I'm impressed. I was prepared to be very disappointed by it, and it did not really let me down. It was totally functional as the first episode of a show. And I think that's, if you get a couple laughs out of me in a pilot, that's fine.
It didn't let you down in that you were disappointed by it? Or that it didn't let you down in that you were not disappointed by it?
I probably just combined things. I was expecting to be disappointed, and I was that is very confusing. I was not let down I was not let down and disappointed by this. I was
okay, I gotcha.
It was a perfectly functional episode of a new show. Made me laugh a couple times, and I thought that it was structured well. Everything worked out for it. I don't have any problem with it, really. The humor thing is going to be tough for this series. I think that humor is more subjective than a lot of other things that like a dramatic series can get away with. So what's funny for some people is not going to be funny for everybody, but I didn't think that this was bad, really. Like it's not a failure of a comedy thing, which is weird to come out of this. I'm not agreeing with the critics' take so far. The thing is, the critics have all watched 5 episodes, or 4 episodes of the show
That's
so
tough.
far.
Yeah. Okay.
So they have a larger sense of how this is actually going to pan out. So I wonder if that will impact things. But Alan Sepinwall, for instance, called this another disappointment under the helm of Alex Kurtzman, which is fairly incendiary for him, I think, in terms of that. But we'll see about it. I didn't feel that way through this first one.
Yeah. I hope they're wrong.
Why do you think they would be? What do you think that? I don't know if you've read any of the reviews. Probably not.
I haven't. I haven't read anything. No.
What would you think is the dichotomy there? Is this going to be one of those Rotten Tomatoes things where the critics score is much lower than the audience score for some reason?
I think it's possible. Yeah. I don't know. Could you like briefly summarize a couple of the problems that they had?
People just say that the humor is too referential to Star Trek. It's too fast. It doesn't exist comfortably in a place where it can exist on its own. Kind of it's mostly having to do with how referential it is. Like, can the show survive if it didn't have any Star Trek material attached to it?
Sure.
So that's largely it. And then just kind of whether or not the humor works for you. But those are the main takeaways, is how can it escape from its Star Trek branding to actually do something with it? And is this kind of humor something that's going to be sustainable or enjoyable to watch over a course of 10 episodes?
That's interesting, because I feel like
Picard is at like 92% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I don't know what really is really going on. I don't know if this is the collapse
talk about a show that can't fucking stand on its own without its referential Star Trek. Jesus Christ.
I just feel like they're opposites. Like, the audience score for Picard is low, I feel, but the critic score is high. And this is just based on one episode. This is the opposite of that. It's very interesting to me.
So now, what I find interesting is we've talked about that problem with other shows in the past, where, we've talked about it on Enterprise. We talked about it on, I think we probably talked about it on Discovery and Picard, in that if you took away the Star Trek branding, would this show be able to stand on its own, or is the branding doing all the work? This show, I think, is different, because I don't 100% know if that's fair to say about it, because the point of it is that it's a Star Trek comedy.
Yeah.
So it inherently is built to live and reference inside the world of Star Trek. And I know I talked about earlier the difference between it being Galaxy Quest, where all the jokes are referential to the thing and being something else, or Riding the Line. And I feel like if you're riding the line, you're going to you are going to be making Star Trek branded jokes that don't work in anything else other than Star Trek.
Well, what if you Galaxy Quested this show? You stripped out all branding of it. Do you think it's still successful in that case? Does it work? Would this episode work if it was not explicitly Star Trek?
I think there'd be like a season and a half on Fox, and then it would end in its 3rd season on Hulu.
Yeah.
Shots fired.
Well, here's the thing. As you're saying, is this different, and are the expectations appropriate to be different for this because it's an animated show? That in some ways feels like it's simply filler to fill time. Filler sounds insulting, but it's literally filler for them to fill CBS All Access until they can get consistent shows under the Star Trek brand that they consider to be like the canonical true Star Trek brands, like Picard and Discovery and stuff. I think you can do that for this show. So I guess to your point, I don't hold the references against the show as strongly as I do against Picard, where I feel that it's kind of a waste of time for Picard to be so referential to previous Star Trek, and to like they can't break free of that shell and tell a new story, where this one seems designed to totally exist in that world. And that's okay with me, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think intention is a big thing you got to think about with this, and the intention here is definitely to exist in that world, be referential but not deferential, I guess is a way to say it, and still tell its own stories. And I think maybe episodes 2, 3, and 4 are all just Klingon Batleth jokes for 25 minutes. I don't know, but or it's. I mean, if it's If every episode is hot banana for 20 minutes, I'm happy to keep coming back. But yeah, it's really, I don't know what people are looking for if they can watch Discovery and specifically Picard and be so enamored with it that they can't acknowledge the fact that if you took Star Trek off the helm, it would just completely collapse under the weight of its shittiness.
Yeah.
But with something like this, it's all of a sudden it's like a crutch. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it does get away with something by being animated. Like the concept of this show is to be referential, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say that, but at the same time, if all this turns into is just Star Trek jokes, that's not a show that's going to last for a very long time. However, within the concept there of, like, people are going to say it's too much like Rick and Morty, but it needs to adopt some of that Rick and Morty thing of where it just draws in influences from everywhere, and it's just like, now we're going to make fun of this sort of concept, and this isn't really even a Star Trek thing, but it's a sci-fi thing that we think is kind of funny and that can work in this world.
I mean, I think you do have the opportunity, if you want to lean more into the Rick and Morty style of handling stuff. You've got 50 years worth of tropes and storylines that you can lean into without being. You can do it smartly, and it can work without really drawing a ton of attention to it. Like if they did a send up of Inner Light or something. Right. But then at the beginning of the episode, you have somebody make a comment about how this is just like that thing that happened that time on the Enterprise. That, okay, yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if you do the Rick and Morty thing where it's like they take the concept and they kind of just like really grind into it, then I think, yeah, you've got a lot of potential there.
Yeah. They just remake every single episode of all the series just in a comedic manner. Just take the plot and sort of strip it away. And
seriously, if you just went into the first season of TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager alone, you could just do like the Airplane thing where you just use the same script.
It's 80 series, 80 seasons of Lower Decks, basically. Yeah. No, it's true. I'm interested in this one.
What were the Lower Decks guys doing when that Pandora's Box squid ghost came to Deep Space Nine that one time, you know?
Oh, the ghost candles that these guys can have sex with.
Hell yeah. Did you like the I feel like this might be a dividing line joke. Did you like the holodeck sequence?
I liked the button joke, which was, this is a very detailed program. I thought that was that was pretty funny. I'm sure they're going to work the holodeck into this. There's no way that you can't. I know we've already seen the clip of some janitors responsible for cleaning the holodeck, which we all know what that means. But yeah, it's. I don't think it would be. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I'm sort of concerned about, really. We'll see how these first 4 episodes go to see where the critics came down on it, but it'll be fascinating to see.
I'll be honest, I was not expecting to go to bat for this as hard as I have tonight. No, I'm not saying like I felt the need to or anything, but I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did.
Yeah.
That's not to say it's perfect or anything, because it's like you said, it's the pilot, it's serviceable. But I think there's definitely potential there for a really fun show. Yeah.
All right, we'll call it a day there. Thank you, patrons, for supporting the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening, especially the patrons for supporting us at patreon.com/thepenskyfile. If you want to support the show, you can go there, patreon.com/thepenskyfile, for a couple $1 a month to get extra stuff, like extra podcasts, extra videos, extra polls that you can vote on to decide what we cover. All that good stuff. We didn't
even talk about the crotchety old cat doctor.
Yeah, who's clearly Pulaski, I think. She's designed as Pulaski. It's another good. I laughed at the heart thing. That she's like, there's no time for anesthesia, just pump his heart. It's good fun.
Yeah.
And as always, special thank you to Captain Tier supporters. So an extra special thanks go to Christian Pouch, Tarek Latif, Chris Tinsley, Mike Burnett, Cardinal Doomsday. Let me get this out here. Joey Mango, Ben Douglas, Neil Brennan, Kyle Barrett, Samuel Custer, Matt Ross, Nathan Elliott, Eric Johnson, Andrew Cholog, Grin Santo, Matt Cutler, Dwayne Hackett, Sean, Jordan Cooper, Kevin Reyes, Vault 13 Hero, Stephen Minton, David Beardmore, Darth Moss, HH28, Matt Courier 6, Jacob 123, Matt Houston, Poindexter G, Nick Sergi, Jakey's Gamer, Patrick Seba, Captain Brazen, Kevin Lowry, Eric Sanjuan, Bradley Kellens, Corey Martin, Woodrow, Rune Vendler, and William Scheisler, and Timothy Cooley. Thank you very much. Hope you all enjoyed Lower Decks. And if not, leave your comments on the video below. We'll see. I'm interested. I'm more interested in this than I am to see what happens in Discovery. Season 3, really. I know that you're very strongly interested in what happens in Discovery, but I think by the time we see the first episode of Season 3 of Discovery, we're going to know exactly what's going to go.
That's the thing. I'm really interested to see the first episode of Discovery. This, I'm looking forward to the whole season. Discovery, I feel like 1 or 2 in, we're going to be like, okay, all right, back to the same old tricks here.
Back to it. All right, anything you want to say, Clay, before we go?
We got Rotten Horror Picture Show. We just had an episode come out on The Return of the Living Dead, which is a great 80s horror comedy zombie movie. And ironically enough, the next episode you hear of this, because I think we held it back, right? Because we were doing Lower Decks.
Yes. For Enterprise you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. You will hear me fumble over what the next badass is, because at that point when we recorded it, that will have not come out. But I think it will have come out by the time that episode comes. Anyway, the next episodes of Badass, which will be coming out next, are Worrymen and Sideshow, because I have it pulled up this time, and I'm ready.
There we go.
So I can tell you exactly what the episodes are. They're pretty good. They're good episodes. One of them is about, it's one good episode. One of them is Killer Croc ends up hanging out with some really kindly freak show people who have started their own life in the woods.
Yeah.
And the other one is a questionable Mad Hatter story where he starts controlling people by creating little South American style Worrymen dolls that he sells to rich white people who come to South America. So it's interesting episodes.
That's it. Thank you very much, guys. So just for people that they know, we'll be covering Lower Decks, at least for this first season, until we decide that it's not a series that can support it. We'll cover one Lower Decks episode with a podcast. So for the next 10 weeks, it'll be one Enterprise a week on Tuesday, and then on Friday, Lower Decks episode will come out.
I'm going to make a prediction, which I'll be happy to backtrack when the time comes. I think this show has the potential to be written well enough that we can talk about an episode like it's an episode.
Yeah, I wonder.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because I think, like I said, it was a pretty strongly written Star Trek episode, jokes aside.
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of stuff we'll be able to talk about. I hope there is. If by episode 4 there's not, then I'll be happy to
the sci-fi
pretend
plots
I never said
here.
that.
The sci-fi plots here felt like they weren't really the focus of the episode. It's just kind of the action that's going on.
Sure.
Like and I imagine that's because it's the pilot, where you don't really need you don't know the characters well enough to like dive into a story that you're going to focus on. But I would imagine that they will. I wouldn't say slow it down, but they will probably turn the story into more of a priority as to where the comedy comes from. That's what I would assume has to happen when you're writing these things. So we'll see. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. Check out all the other shows at thepenskyfile.com, and that's about it. We'll be back with Carbon Creek, comes out on Tuesday. So that's the next Enterprise episode, and then we'll be back with the next Lower Decks episode on Friday after that. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you later.